The medieval tavern. Place of respite where travellers and adventurers can get a tankard of beer, a cooked meal, and a warm, comfy bed. Except the quaint medieval tavern that most people think they know probably looked very different in reality. Today we're going to have a look at how the Green Dragon Inn, the Blushing Tankard, or the Kingfisher in Novigrad would be if they were a little bit more historically correct, grounded. Before we get into medieval taverns, we first have to establish what medieval actually means, because that term gets used for a lot of non-medieval things. The word medieval tends to invoke the image of knights riding towards a castle through a field being toiled upon by peasants, the typical fantasy adventure setting. And this is, broadly speaking, accurate. However, the finer details usually associated with this are less so. Just to illustrate, medieval, sometimes medieval, not medieval, definitely not medieval, and really not medieval. Images like this, captioned medieval plague doctor, are everywhere on the internet. Not medieval. Cromwell, Henry VIII, all of these aren't medieval. They are early modern. And setting the record straight matters, because things worked very differently between the medieval and the early modern eras. For example, once you get well and truly into the early modern era, that knight who was galloping through the fields, he would have just hired mercenaries to do the job for him while sitting comfortably in a palace as a courtier. It's widely agreed that the medieval period stretches from the year 500 to somewhere in the 1400s. 1500 often being thought as far as you can feasibly stretch it. Historians can debate for days on that end date. Personally, I like the year 1492, but that's just me. Regardless of your preferred end date, a big difference between the medieval and the early modern era is that the early modern era had the printing press. And thanks to this, we have a lot more written sources from the early modern era. The thing is, a lot of research into the medieval era involves reading information written down in the early modern era and extrapolating backwards in time, which might be why a lot of the ideas from both time periods often get mixed up. If all of this is a bit too vague, there's a very nice and easy rule of thumb. If it's in Crusader Kings, it's medieval. If it's in Europa Universalis, it's early modern. With that out of the way, let's go to the tavern. It's pretty much a cliché that the average tabletop role-playing game always starts in a tavern. You find yourself in a small hamlet at the edge of the kingdom. You're tired and thirsty. I go to the tavern. There isn't one. Okay, I go to the inn. There definitely isn't one of those. Okay. I look for a place to get a drink. You see people gathered outside of a house, and there's some branches outside of the house. You can sort of make out that two of these people are holding earthenware drinking vessels. I march in with a broad smile, step up to the bar and go, there isn't one. Eh? Huh? Nope, there is no bar. Okay, I ask the barkeep, whoever's in charge here, for a flagon of beer. Okay, there's a lady in the middle of the room standing over a cauldron of liquid. You walk up to her and ask her for a flagon of beer. She goes, beer? Is that Ponzi German stuff? I don't have any of that. I do have lovely ale. Yes, one of those, please. All right then, give us your pot. My pot? Is it always like this? Do I need a pot? What's happening? All right, let's do a little bit of explaining. As any member of Camera will happily tell you, the modern day bar and pubs grew out of the alehouse, the tavern and the inn. Who is he talking to? We are starting with the alehouse. If you ever find yourself in the Middle Ages, you'll probably run into one of these. There's nobody there. Small farming villages would not have a tavern or any sort of permanent drinking establishment. Population simply wasn't dense or rich enough to support one. So when a brewster, that's a lady who brews, made some ale, she would put up a broom or some branches outside her house, signaling there was ale to be had. Brew? Broom? I wonder if it's related. Like, why not just drink it all yourself? You can certainly try. But this stuff only stays good for a few days. And it still got you drunk, so you might as well sell your surplus. So when the broom goes up, your house becomes the alehouse that day. People show up, bringing their own pot, sometimes even their own chair, and they have a drink. The next week, your neighbor might put out their broom and run the alehouse, and so on and so on. In the late Middle Ages, hops and more advanced preservation methods began to allow for beer and ale to stay good for longer. This allowed brewsters, especially in bigger villages and small towns, to go professional. They would often want customers to find their house easily, and this is how signs outside pubs, like the one in our opening, became a thing. Most people couldn't read, so you needed some way to show your name. Our alehouse, for example, would be called something like the Quill and Spoon. In the late 14th century, towards the end of the medieval period, these signs would become mandatory, so that inspectors knew where to find you and inspect your ale. And you know you've become professional when you are being inspected by the government. So after an evening of merriment in the hamlet, you make your way to the city and the court of the king. On your way, you come across a market town. I head to the inn. Ooh! Let's see. Oh, you're in luck. There is an inn. What do you mean luck? Medieval inns were permanent commercial establishments where travelers could sleep. And they were quite rare. For example, there was only one inn in the entirety of Oxford, not a small town, before the year 1300. The famous historical medieval inn was, of course, the Tabard, mentioned in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which is right here in Southwark. These days it appears to be a health hub. Good for them. The George, a pub which used to be a coaching inn, and despite what Wikipedia tries to tell you, isn't medieval, is just around the corner. So, why so many historical inns here in Southwark? Well, it makes sense when you realise that Southwark is just south of London Bridge, one of the main entrances into London proper. All throughout history, you see that inns are quite often just outside the main entrances of cities, which makes sense. There's enough space there to stable the animals, and in cases when there's a toll to cross into the city, which was often the case here at London Bridge, you can save a bit of money by leaving your entourage as you go into the city to conduct your business. This was the sort of footfall you needed to run a successful inn, and this was the economic and political heart of England. Therefore, outside of Southwark and London, inns were rather rare. So, where do I sleep when there isn't an inn? There were quite a few options, though people generally chose to stay in places where they were already sort of associated with. For example, pilgrims would often stay at churches or monasteries. Merchants would stay with other merchants, often people they knew through their guild. Travelling nobles might borrow a room in the castle or a manor of the local lord. All of this made inns, well, as we said, rather rare. Well, that is until the late Middle Ages, where, for a host of reasons, including increasing travel and urbanization, the number of inns started to grow exponentially. By the year 1400, Oxford would have gone from having just one inn to having at least 21 inns. So you're in luck, there is indeed an inn. Brilliant. What time is it? Oh, I don't know, noonish, something like that. I walk up to the bar. No, you don't. No bar? No bar. Okay, I walk to the middle of the space. I raise my voice and go, "Who does a man have to?" The people in the inn shush you, and somebody walks up to you and goes, "Sir, please lower your voice. People are trying to work here." Wait, there are other people here. Loads of people are sitting around tables, clearly discussing trade and legal issues. Legal issues? Yes, when inns did become popular, they didn't just serve travellers. Since they were a bit more regulated than alehouses and taverns, They were considered trustworthy, neutral venues which attracted working professionals. The ones around Chancery Lane here attracted lawyers, and over time, English lawyers were attached to their preferred inn. To this day, if you want to be a barrister, that's the lawyers who go to court here in England, you know, the ones with the wigs, you have to be a member of an Inn of Court. There's 4 of them. There's Gray's Inn, the smallest one with the coolest coat of arms. Lincoln's Inn, the biggest and most picturesque one, even though a lot of this is a lot more recent than it looks. There's Middle Temple, who still have their beautiful Elizabethan hall. And last but not least, Inner Temple, who used to also have a very pretty hall, but then during the Blitz, the Luftwaffe had a different opinion on that.
It dropped a bomb on it. And no, before you ask, that is not why the bar is called the bar. There was no bar.
Yeah, cool. Can I get a drink? Sure. What would you like? A beer, an ale, please. Yeah. You see, the Brewster Sally hasn't been in today. But there's the same. Oh, what now? It's a sort of tea. Wait, tea? Well, herbal beverage. Let's have a look. Yes, before tea properly arrived in Europe, people already had infused drinks. Initially, these were just things like mint or even nettles in boiling water. But as the Middle Ages went on, these got incredibly complex. The late medieval book Le Ménagier de Paris describes a richly complicated infusion, or tisane as they were called. Take some pearl barley along with aromatic ingredients like lemon or figs. And if you want, you can even put in some licorice root. Yeah, not a fan either. Fill it with whatever you want and let us know down below how you like your tisane. Take boiling water, pour it over your assembled ingredients, and then leave it for at least 10 minutes or until entirely cold. Then strain through a cloth into a medieval goblet. Or a jar works too. Once strained, sweeten with a lump of rock sugar. And there you go, lovely tisane. Or as it's mostly called these days, barley water. And you enjoy a lovely barley tisane.
Okay, I'm just surprised that the drink at the inn is closer to bubble tea than beer.
So, would you like to stay at the inn?
Yeah, I'll take a room.
A room?
No room?
You can pay to have a spot in the dormitory upstairs, or you can pay a bit less and just find a little place to sleep here in the common area.
Oh, so it's like a backpacker's hostel. I lost my bedroll in that fight with the goblins.
Yes, you threw it at the goblins after setting it on fire, that's correct, yes.
Yeah. So I'll take a spot in the dormitory.
Okay, after dark you make your way upstairs and there are 3 big beds.
Which one's empty?
None of them.
Oh, great.
No, you see, you bought a spot in a bed, not a bed, and definitely not a room.
You are getting way too much fun out of this, aren't you?
I am, yes. Private rooms in inns were not a thing. This wasn't some early medieval thing that was gone by the time the early modern era came around. No. This was the norm deep into the early modern era. Some of these big communal beds even built up a reputation, like the Great Bed of Ware from, well, Ware. This communal bed was so big and ostentatious that it made its way into Shakespeare's Twelfth Night as a cultural point of reference. So next time you rent a room in Skyrim and you go up to that little bed in that one single room, keep in mind that in reality it would have been a big bed with lots of people in it, because warmth is precious and body heat is not to be wasted.
One long awkward rest.
Yes, because last night's pottage was made with beans and onion, so it was a nice and warm rest.
So I go downstairs to pay my bill. I don't want to calculate it. I put 2 gold on the the table.
Ooh!
What?
You're very generous, sir.
Am I? I got 100 gold from my starter kit.
Oh! Well, prices fluctuated wildly across the Middle Ages, but at some point in the late Middle Ages, a noble, that's the big golden coin, would get you room and board in London for a few months. Considering the average monthly rent in London these days is over £2,000, it's safe to say you left quite a big tip. Also, all the staff gather round to give you a round of applause as you leave. Give me a perception check.
18.
you notice that a lot of people here want to marry you.
Oh, I'm rich.
So, if you want to give your campaign a teensy bit more realism without upending everything, make silver the dominant currency, not gold. So, where are we going?
I'm loaded. I want to have a party.
Well,
Don't tell me, there aren't any.
no, there are plenty.
Ooh.
Now, if you're a noble, you can be invited to a banquet at a castle. If you're a commoner, right?
Yes?
Yeah, you can go to a festival.
Oh, are there any?
Are there any festivals? Just let me... no. However, if you have the money,
I do.
there is always the tavern.
Wait, what?
Yes, you're in a big town and in the Middle Ages, especially in the later years, there would have been plenty of taverns there.
Awesome. Is there a good one?
Where you hear people talking about the Lamb and MITRE as the place to be.
Well, off to the Lamb and MITRE.
Great, so you arrive in the Lamb and MITRE.
I walk up to the bar. I ask whoever's in charge, 1 tankard of ale, please, as I jiggle the coin purse.
Oh, okay, well, let me check here. You attract a lot of attention, and the tavern keeper's eyes open up with delight as he walks up to you and puts his arm around you and says, "Sir, this is not some alehouse, but I can offer you the finest wines as I am a respectable vintner."
I see.
Also, around 4 people are inviting you to come play at their table.
Ooh, fun.
Also, the tavern keeper goes, "May I inquire, have you eaten?"
No, I haven't, no.
Ah, you're in luck, because we have a lovely lozenge in the oven.
Lozenge? What's that?
Kind of like a lasagna.
Lasagna?
Yes, goes the tavern keeper. It's excellent for a man who is planning a night of heavy drinking.
I am loving all of this, but I am very confused.
The last of our 3 venues of hospitality is the tavern. The one that fits the common fantasy trope the most, as this is where you would get your gambling and wild drinking. If you squint, you can arguably say that the tavern started with the Romans, although what they had back then was very different. The tabernae were stalls where people could shop. Wine sellers and merchants also had these stalls. Over time, they would put out some tables and chairs and people would start to drink their wine at the wine merchant. And you can sort of see where it goes from there. This is grossly oversimplified, but you get the point. Of the 3 establishments we've looked at, the thing that made the inn an inn was that it offered lodgings, unlike the tavern or the alehouse. And the thing that set the tavern apart from the alehouse was that the tavern sold wine. Now, you might imagine there being some overlap between the 3, and you would be right. Initially, economics kept them all separate. Alehouses were found in rural communities that couldn't support a tavern or an inn. But in towns and cities, there was a significant overlap between taverns and inns, especially when inns started becoming more popular. If an innkeeper was also a member of the Vintners Guild, it was quite easy for them to also start serving wine and indeed become sort of a tavern and inn. Although not all inns wanted the rowdy reputation that often came with being a tavern. As the Middle Ages ended and became the early modern era, alehouses also became more professional and permanent. And so the line between all 3 establishments became very vague. Who cares about labels and semantics? Well, the state did, because alehouses, inns and taverns were all taxed differently. It wasn't that you had to be one or the other, you could run your establishment as a tavern as well as an inn, but you'd be taxed as both a tavern and an inn. So assigning the correct category was a serious endeavor. In the 17th century, long after the medieval period is gone, English magistrates tasked with categorizing these got the guidance. Every inn is not an alehouse, nor every alehouse an inn. But if an inn uses the common selling of ale, it is then also an alehouse. And if an alehouse lodges and entertains travellers, it is also an inn. Lots of sources from the late Middle Ages and the early modern era understandably conflate taverns and alehouses all the time. There were also regional differences in what people thought each establishment should look like. In the 18th century, John Byng writes, "The best Cambridge inn would make a bad Oxford alehouse." Indeed, the division and discrepancy between alehouse, tavern and inn lasted all the way through the early modern era. All the way until pretty much the eve of the Victorian era, in which they started transitioning into pubs, restaurants and hotels. But that's a story for a different video, so make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss that. Are you already a subscriber? Lovely, and thank you. Could you please leave us a like? It really helps us out. Thank you.
Tavern? Yeah.
Oh yes, right, you're in the tavern. Sorry, forgot. They might have beer, but you're not here for the beer. Beer in the Middle Ages can get you plenty tipsy, but people mainly drank it for calories. If you want to get hammered, you opted for wine. That wine could be made from any fruit, by the way. Grapes, of course, but also like apples, cider, and pears. Also, when thinking grape wine, don't think a smooth Châteauneuf-du-Pape. No. Wine these days stays good because of the sulfites, which they didn't have back then. So, if you were not near to where the wine was produced, it would have been spiced and usually fortified. This means that in England, most grape wines, especially the red ones, would have tasted like a strong mulled port. Yeah, that will put some hair on your chest. Another thing you could do in a tavern is grab a meal. Now, the cliche is that there's a forever stew, and that was indeed a thing in many taverns. But it wasn't as ubiquitous as often thought. Food could be pretty much anything. However, taverns were, first and foremost, places of drinking. And according to Maggie Black's The Medieval Cookbook, lozenge was regarded as ideal ahead of a night of drinking, as it would seal in the alcohol. So, for our tavern meal, we're making a lozenge, as per the recipe in the Forme of Cury. We're going to start by making dough sheets from what the Forme of Cury calls bread flour. This is just wholemeal flour, which seems thematically appropriate. The recipe doesn't specify amounts, so we're using a 1:2 ratio. Roll them as thin as paper, then either let them dry or boil them straight away. Feel free, by the way, to use shop-bought lasagna sheets if that's easier for you. The recipe prescribes that they should be boiled in broth. Then put the first layer in your tray and cover them with grated cheese. We are using cheddar and powder douce. By the way, you can make this with any sort of cheese they had in the Middle Ages. This could, for instance, also be done with cottage cheese. Powder douce, on the other hand, is a medieval spice mix. Its contents would depend on the area, but we are going with a common one, which is sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg and clove. Sprinkle some on top of the grated cheese and then add a new layer and repeat this twice for a total of 3 layers. Now set aside until it's time to eat. When it is time for dinner, reheat in the oven or very gently on the hob with a lid. Serve and eat in anticipation of an evening of merriment. Because as nice as this is, you don't come to the tavern to eat. So what did people do in a tavern? Well, there's a very good source for that. The Codex Buranus is a 13th century manuscript and it contains a bunch of songs. Some of them you may know because they form the basis of Karl Orff's Carmina Burana. You know, that one. The originals don't sound as bombastic, and plenty of modern day bards have recorded the medieval songs as they would have sounded. We'll leave some links below. One of the songs is called In Taberna Quando Sumus, and the title of that song being eerily similar to the name of this channel is not a coincidence. It's a delightful little song, and if you're wondering how it sounds, well, we already played it for you. That's a highly simplified version of In Taberna Quando Sumus. Now you know. The lyrics provide an excellent look into the vibe of a late medieval tavern. If there was ever a national anthem for D&D and other TTRPG players, we submit that this should be it. The song opens by telling the listener to, well, listen to what happens in the tavern. He's still doing it. The tavern where money is host. Because unlike a banquet or a festival, where you had to be of a certain social standing or part of a community like a parish, in the tavern, if you have the money, you can come play and drink. We opened the song by, weirdly, confirming a bunch of cliches. We walk into the tavern and we immediately go to play. Play, that is, gamble. Of all the gamblers in the tavern, some are wearing sacks. Some are outright naked, while others come here to get their clothes. Cards were already available, but they were quite new, so the default would have been dice games. None of them fear death as they drink and roll their dice in the honor of Bacchus. The singers of the song then drink to the libertines and prisoners, the living, the dearly departed, and the Christians. Very nice of them. Then they go on to make more toasts for things like loose nuns, lecherous priests, sailors, quarrelers, and bandits, sort of getting worse as they go along. The final drink is for the greatest scoundrels of them all, the Pope and the King. Then the song reaches its climax by listing all the drinkers, which is everyone. He drinks, she drinks, the soldier drinks, the cleric drinks, the white man drinks, the black man drinks, the fool drinks, the scholar drinks, young people, old people, everybody drinks. Remarkably socially progressive, those medieval taverns, weren't they? The song ends with the singer saying, "We drank all our money. We're poor, and now if someone judges us for it, Oh god, we named our channel after a song that glorifies being poor." We could keep going on about this, but the video is long enough. So, if you're making art, writing a story, developing a roleplay setting, coding a video game, or any other delightful work of fiction set in a medieval or pseudo-medieval setting, what should you look out for if you want to give it some historical grounding? Not that you have to, you do you. But if you want to, what should you look out for in your alehouses, taverns, and inns? Well, firstly, you should have them. Even though a big takeaway here was that taverns and inns weren't that ubiquitous, there were still plenty of them, especially in the late medieval period and in cities. But in villages, maybe scale it down to an alehouse. Make it a bit more informal, or something like this. You find yourself back in Whistler's Creek, the small hamlet where you started your adventure. The lady whose chickens you stole back then. Yes? Her house is now the alehouse. I'm gonna need a deception roll, aren't I? Yes, you are. Secondly, don't have a bar. Yes, this was a bit of a running gag, but bars and counters to serve drinks weren't a thing. And this isn't something that came about in the early modern era, making it sort of close enough. No. Bars only started appearing in the late 17th century and only became ubiquitous in the 18th century. Go look at paintings from before that era. There's plenty depicting taverns, but not a bar to be seen. So don't have a bar, but have like barrels of wine, cauldrons of ale, or if it's a fancy inn or tavern, you can even have those really big barrels with little tiny taps on the side. Thirdly, have people bring their own drinking vessels. Bring a pot to an alehouse, and to a tavern, bring a jack or a carafe. Or a flagon if you really want. Yay! Fourthly, if you have an inn, have a bedtime. As we saw, inns could serve drink and would flirt with being a tavern, but they were, first and foremost, places for sleeping. Ergo, they didn't keep running as late as others. If your party wants to party, have them go to a tavern instead. People want to sleep here. I order another round of... Oh, sorry. And lastly, have fun in the tavern. Often in fantasy and historical fiction, taverns and alehouses, they're these dark, dingy places. Sure, some places were probably a bit rougher than others, but as the second half of our namesake song shows, everyone went for drinks. In an era where entertainment and leisure activities were scarce, the tavern and the alehouse were places where people went to meet, talk and play. For better or worse. So that's it for our third birthday video. A bit of a different one, and let us know what you think about it. We might make more of these broader videos where we don't just talk about historical food and drink, but branch out to historical leisure culture in general. Thank you very much for joining us.
And in cases when there's a toll to head into the city, which is the case here, and that train is also going into the city. This was